Welcome to Attic Static. Today we have two stories for you, the geometry of the silent slope and the blink of the backcountry. Sit down, relax, and enjoy. The geometry of the silent slope. To whoever finds this notebook, do not panic when you reach the summit of Peak 47. Most people think a ski resort is a static place, a series of defined trails, chairlifts, and lodges. They are wrong. When the lifts shut down and the tourists retreat to their beds, the mountain begins to rearrange itself. I was the first to notice it during the great frost of last winter. I was skiing alone, seeking the solitude of the late evening, when the lights flickered out across the valley. The silence was immediate, heavy as a woolen blanket. I paused on a gentle incline near the pines and looked back at the village. That is when the first anomaly occurred. I turned to my left and saw the lodge, a sturdy, timber-framed building with glowing windows. I turned to my right, expecting more forest, but instead found a vertical wall of solid, white limestone. It wasn't a cliff face, it was perfectly flat, smooth as polished marble, stretching upward until it vanished into the mist. There were no trees on it, no birds perched upon it, just a void of stone where there should have been slope. I took 3 steps forward to investigate. The ground beneath my skis changed from soft powder to a hard, glassy surface that hummed slightly against my boots. I realized then that the geometry of the mountain was beginning to fold. I tried to turn back, but as I did, the lodge didn't just move, it stretched. It became long and thin, like a ribbon of wood pulled across a table, while the limestone wall doubled in height. The air grew colder, smelling of ozone and old paper. This was the first sign that we weren't just on a mountain anymore. We were in a transition space, a place where the rules of here are beginning to fray at the edges. I began to run, my skis cutting through the snow with a rhythmic hiss crunch. Every time I rounded a bend, the environment shifted. One moment, I was passing a cluster of frozen birches. The next, the trees were replaced by towering pillars of translucent glass that vibrated with a low, melodic tone. They weren't growing out of the ground so much as they were suspended in it. Then came the most unsettling part, the persistence of the path. I realized that every time I looked back at where I had just been, the path behind me was changing. A slope I had just crossed became a lake of still, silver water. A thicket of pines turned into a meadow of blue grass. It was as if the mountain were being painted by an invisible artist who hadn't quite finished the portrait yet. I reached what felt like a plateau. In the center stood a single object that shouldn't have been there, a massive, floating cube of obsidian, roughly 10 feet tall. It didn't cast a shadow in any particular direction. Instead, it seemed to swallow the light around it. I stood before it, my breath coming in ragged plumes. The hum from the glass pillars reached a crescendo, then suddenly, absolute silence. I felt a tug at the base of my skull, a sensation of being pulled forward by an invisible thread. I stepped toward the obsidian cube, and the world tilted 45 degrees. Gravity shifted, and I found myself sliding sideways across the snow, not down a hill, but toward the center of the floating block, \n. As I reached the cube, the impossible geometry finally collapsed. The limestone wall, the glass pillars, and the ribbon lodge all merged into a single point of light at the heart of the obsidian. It was the source, the anchor of this strange pocket of existence. For 3 seconds, time stopped. The snow hung in the air like diamonds. My heart ceased to beat. Then, with a sound like a heavy book slamming shut, the world snapped back into place. I fell forward and landed on soft, white powder. When I opened my eyes, the limestone wall was gone. The glass pillars were replaced by familiar pine trees. The lodge was back to its sturdy, timber-framed shape. I looked up. I was standing on a perfectly normal slope at Peak 47. There was no obsidian cube, no blue grass, and no hum in the air. I was back in the world that could be measured by maps. But as I stood up and brushed the snow from my coat, I noticed something small. Resting right at my feet was a single shard of glass, perfectly clear, perfectly smooth, and vibrating with a faint, lingering note. The mountain had finished its thought. It had folded itself back into reality, leaving me as the only witness to the moment it dared to be impossible. And now, our next story. The blink of the backcountry. Scene 1. The hike is grueling, but beautiful. I am deep in the heart of the Blackwood Wilderness, miles from the nearest paved road. My backpack feels like a physical weight on my shoulders, a rhythmic ache that keeps me moving forward. The silence here isn't empty, it's heavy. It tastes of pine needles and damp earth. I stop for a moment to catch my breath, looking at the towering hemlocks. Everything is still. Or so I think. Scene 2. As the sun dips below the ridge, I find the perfect clearing for my camp. The ground is soft, covered in a carpet of moss and fallen leaves. I set up my tent with practice movements. The shadows begin to stretch, turning from gray to a bruised purple. It's peaceful, but there's an underlying sense of being watched, a prickle on the back of my neck that suggests the forest is inhaling along with me. Scene 3. Dinner is simple, eaten by the flickering orange glow of a small campfire. I sit on a log, watching the sparks dance upward toward the stars. Every time I glance away from the flames to look at the dark tree line, I feel it, a subtle shift in the geometry of the woods. A branch snaps to my left. When I turn my head sharply, nothing is there but the swaying ferns. The moment my eyes land on them, they seem to settle into place. Scene 4. I decide to sleep, but the transition from dusk to night brings a strange phenomenon. Just before lying down, I see it, a tall, thin shape standing at the edge of the firelight. It looks like a human silhouette made of woven willow branches and gray mist. Its head is tilted slightly to the right. I blink, and in that split second of closed eyelids, it moves 3 feet closer. When I open my eyes again, it is standing just beyond the reach of the embers. Scene 5. I lay back on my sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling of the tent. The shape is still there. I can see its long, spindly fingers hovering just above the dirt floor. I take a deep breath and close my eyes for a count of 3. When I open them, the shape has vanished entirely. It isn't in front of me anymore. It's behind me, looming over my shoulder like a silent sentinel. Scene 6. Panic begins to simmer in my chest. I realize the rule of this forest. The thing only moves when I am not observing it. To keep it at bay, I must keep my eyes wide. I sit up and stare intensely at the space directly in front of me. It is a hollow void of darkness. Every time I blink, even a quick flicker of the lashes, the shape zips across the clearing. Blink, it's by the pine tree. Blink, it's halfway between the tree and my face. Blink, it is now hovering inches from my nose. Scene 7. The sensation is surreal. I can see it clearly when I focus, a towering, elegant creature with a face like a smooth river stone and eyes that look like polished obsidian. But the moment I try to study its details, it dances. If I look at its hands, they move to its chest. If I look at its feet, they leap toward the canopy. It is a master of the periphery, a ghost of the in-between moments. Scene 8. A sudden, sharp crack echoes through the woods, the sound of a heavy trunk falling. Instinctively, I flinch and shut my eyes tight for 2 full seconds. When they snap open, the creature is no longer in front of me. It is directly above me, hanging from a low-hanging branch like a bat. Its long, willow-like fingers are reaching down, just brushing the top of my head. The air around it feels cold, smelling faintly of old parchment and rain. Scene 9. I realize that if I blink too much, it will eventually reach me. It is playing a game of hide-and-seek with my perception. I decide to make a move. I fix my gaze on its obsidian eyes, refusing to let my lids drop even for a millisecond. It freezes. The creature becomes a statue of gray mist and wood, hovering in the air, suspended in time because I am witnessing it. For a long minute, we share a perfect, motionless connection. Scene 10. Finally, I decide to conquer the fear. I reach out my hand, steadying my breath. I don't just look at it, I acknowledge it. With one deliberate movement, I grab its cool, textured hand with my own. The moment our skin meets, the movement rule breaks. The creature lets out a soft, melodic hum, a sound like a cello string being plucked, and dissolves into a swirl of golden dust that settles on the grass. The forest falls silent again. The shape is gone, no longer needing to move because it has finally been seen and held. I lie back down, eyes wide open, watching the dust settle in the moonlight. The end. Subscribe for more horror stories and make sure to like.